Welcome to another movie plot and enjoy the memories. We open on a dark and stormy night with a wealthy homeowner being robbed of his trinkets. His head is stuck in the fireplace and turned into a tiki torch, burning this man alive only 42 seconds into the movie. 40 years later, his posh grandson Mark has a conversation around the centerpiece with his mother. She read that people are going missing in the area and says that Mark must drink juice until he's old enough for coffee, but this dude's like 30. Fortunately, on his way out the door, the butler Jenkins sneaks him some of that good stuff because it's such a stressful life living in the burbs. Nearby, both ends of a stereotype walk to school, with Sarah being the girl next door and China being the town bicycle. They come across an unfamiliar wax museum that's made even stranger by being in the middle of a residential neighborhood. The Willy Wonka-looking owner David appears out of thin air and invites the passing strangers to a private showing at midnight. He says they can bring up to 6 friends, and since this is before registries exist, the girls agree to bring some more victims. David Copperfields his way away while Sarah and China go to school where they're friends with Money Mark and some dude named Tony. Today's history lesson is on the trouble with dictators, but their teacher puts a little too much passion into his Sig Heils. During recess, once China's finished compromising the quarterback Jonathan, she tells the group about the museum, and I guess they've nothing better to do. Before they go out that night, Mark argues with China because they're ex-lovers or something doesn't really matter. She says that what matters is that he isn't tall, dark and handsome enough for her, while John proves that brain cells are only optional. As they arrive at the museum at midnight, we meet the other friends, Gem and her mulleted boyfriend Jim. Despite their appearances, they're probably the smartest of the bunch and decide to leave while the going's still good. The dumber 4 approach the door and think that it swings open by itself, but it's just the butler Hans, who's billed at 2 foot 9 inches. He lets the guests inside, where they meet the 7-foot butler Jr., who behaves like a whiny little child when he's yelled at. Hans shoos him away before he gets stepped on and directs the kids to the wax exhibits where the figures look surprisingly real. Some displays feature man killed by lumberjack and other man falls downstairs because ugly man pushed him. There's also girl who drinks petroleum, some creatures that aren't even human, and a few exhibits that are still empty. Tony steps on one passing through a portal into some forest where he's now dressed like a bum with long hair. Assuming that one of his friends just slipped him some acid, he wanders into the house and finds the homeowner on a full moon. He tells Tony to leave because he's begun to transform into a werewolf, but the kid just thinks he's cold, so he goes out to get some firewood. When he returns, the creature attacks and takes a bite out of Tony's arm, but before it can finish him off, 2 hunters come barging in. Before the old man can shoot a silver bullet at the werewolf, it tears his young associate down the center like a Subway sandwich. He finally shoots the beast, destroying it, but Tony has also begun to transform and needs to be put down like a dog. He's shot midway through the transformation, so Mark is unable to recognize him in the museum, where he just looks like the Wolfman. Next, it's China's turn when she sees an attractive figure in the Dracula exhibit, and this girl must be really desperate. She steps through the portal into an 18th century dress where the vampire is holding a dinner party at his castle. He serves her raw meat that she thinks is steak and blood, which I guess she thinks is just some red sauce. China eats the leg of her fictional fiancé Charles, who's currently being dismembered in the kitchen just to get in this bloodsucker's pants. Everyone else at the table does the same, and afterwards a servant shows China to the guest room as she thinks this is just a dream. Soon Dracula's son Stefan sneaks in the window and would easily be able to bite this girl if his fangs didn't prematurely ejaculate. China evades the pointy ends and runs downstairs past the random border collie and into the kitchen. She meets her fictional fiancé Charles in a rather compromised position when Stefan enters and begins snacking on his leg. When he goes for China, she shoves a knife into his torso, then combines it with another to make them into a cross. She places it on Stefan's head, causing it to explode with the Holy Spirit, then breaks down a wooden chair for stakes. Dracula's brides descend on China, but she manages to slay 2 of them in a bloody mess before pushing the 3rd onto the booze. The court kills the vampire like any old wooden stake, but fiancé Charles was bitten, so China says screw him and ditches the stranger. She runs into Dracula, who immediately puts her under his spell, or she's just really into this dude enough to let him bite her on the neck. Another one down, and Sarah checks out the Marquis de Sade's display, who is imprisoned for being too sexy among other things. Sarah likes this historical figure so much that just a book about him gets her all sweaty and is about to step inside when Mark says we're leaving. Hans says that Tony and China left already, so everyone thinks they're boning, while Sarah reveals that she's also attracted to Mark. Not enough to date him though, as Sarah pulls away from a kiss and says she needs more in a man, which is the story of Mark's life. Jonathan's story, however, is written in crayon, and he goes searching the museum looking for his missing squeeze. He comes across David at the Phantom of the Opera display, where he's pushed inside and turned into the Phantom's next victim. Meanwhile, Mark finds the maid finished his homework, but she simply wrote that dictators are bad because they have little mustaches. Since China and Tony didn't come home last night, Mark reports them missing to the police, as I guess they don't have any parents of their own. Inspector Roberts acts like this kid's somehow making his job harder by telling him there's more missing people, yet he leads him right to the killers. This is the first time Mark's met David, who lets them inside but pretends like he has no clue where the missing students are. He shows the inspector around and says the place isn't even open for public viewing until they finish the exhibits. David says, "Would you like a closer look?" and tries push Roberts into the Egyptian display but stops when he says that he really must be going. He just tells Mark that there's nothing there to see but recognizes some of the figures' faces from missing persons ads. Returning later that day, he sneaks inside to take a closer look at China in the Dracula display, and I don't blame him. He takes a chunk out of her cheek to test later, but as he passes through the Egyptian display, Roberts is transported back to ancient times. Some old professor opens a sarcophagus and reads the scroll found inside. As what harm ever came from reading a scroll? It's cursed, of course, and a mummy resurrects that crushes their praying servant's head beneath its foot. It's immune to bullets, so the professor impales it with a spear but gets reversed on and dies at the hands of his own poker. Robert's fictional wife just screams the whole time in the corner, and even the mummies had enough of listening to her. He throws the woman inside the tomb to shut her up, then takes Roberts and body slams him on top of her for the finisher. Both are sealed inside, which makes for a rather lousy display, while Roberts's partner outside begins to get worried. He enters wearing his tactical sunglasses inside, but they're probably the reason why he can't see Junior, who breaks his neck instantly. This angers David, who needs 2 more bodies to finish his ritual, while Mark and Sarah discover exactly what that means. Papers found in Mark's attic explain that it was David who killed his grandfather at the beginning of the movie and stole all his stuff. The pair go to see his grandfather's friend Wilfred, who says that stuff was 18 trinkets from evil people throughout history. David sold his soul to the devil, and once he has fed 18 people to the wax gods, his grotesque creations will come to life. Wilfred says they must burn the building down to prevent this, so Mark and Sarah return to the museum with arson on their minds. They make their way past the giant vat of wax and upstairs past the Wolfman to begin dousing the building in gas. Sarah steps into the Marquis display because, of course, while Mark's pushed by the help into a black and white cemetery. He's in an old zombie movie where they're crawling out of the graves by the dozens trying to eat his brains. Mark reaches the edge of the exhibit and thinks about testing if this is just a dream, but doesn't, and leaps back through the portal. He evades capture and jumps into the exhibit with Sarah, where she's dressed up like an aristocrat and brought before Marquis. He has her chained up and begins whipping her for the Prince of England's viewing pleasure, but she seems to enjoy it. When Mark enters, he comes across a room full of Marquis' girls who are all jealous that Sarah gets to be beaten first. The English prince directs the Marquis to kill Sarah with a whip, but before that happens, Mark rescues her, though she doesn't really want to be. She clings to Marquis' leg, begging to be whipped some more, so Mark reminds her that these people killed all her friends. He gives a gun to him and demonstrates that he can't be hurt because apparently things just go through you if you know it isn't real. Realizing being some creep's plaything probably isn't the best career choice, Sarah goes with Mark back to the real world. As soon as they leap through the portal, David and his thugs drag them aside as 2 replacement victims have been lured to the Waxworks. Gemma and James were dumb enough to accept the invite this time and are instantly killed by the exhibits they enter. This concludes David's ritual and brings all of his displays to life, including the former friends who are now the enemy. Before our pair are killed by some of the most grotesque creations, Wilfred enters with a small army of mostly old people ready to do battle. Mark's butler hands out swords, and atop his little rolling castle, Willie leads his troops against the various monsters and serial killers. Notable defeats include Sarah smacking James against a wall and beheading Jonathan with the lumberjack's axe. Mark is seduced by the vampire Sarah, but before she can bite him, Jenkins stakes her in the heart, earning this butler a raise. He's then immediately stabbed to death by Junior, so when Mark finishes shooting evil Gemma, he kills the big guy. Unfortunately, Jenkins doesn't make it, nor does the little guy when Sarah feeds Hans to a man-eating plant. Dracula turns into a bat, but then just has his head blown off, while Wolfman Tony almost gets Wilfred but is killed by his best friend. Every time the Marquis fights, his hair gets in his face, so he ties it up and challenges Mark to a duel. As the place blows up around them due to the fires, Mark runs downstairs and waits to ambush him, but it fails to work. He has a sword fight with the Marquis on a catwalk overlooking the basement, and I don't know why this kid's school teaches fencing, but it must. Mark loses and is about to be finished off when Sarah throws the axe into the Marquis' back, as she must practice. They still have David with a gun to deal with, but fortunately Wilfred arrives in time and shoots the homeowner in the chest. He falls into the vat of wax and gives a final jump scare just to say, "Would you like a closer look?" before sinking below the surface. With the fire spreading and Wilfred having his head ripped off by the werewolf, the pair flee out the back door and escape. The whole waxworks burns to the ground, and we hear Roberts begging for help from inside the tomb, but it never comes. The only survivors of the disastrous event walk home while a hand emerges from the rubble, but there isn't anything else attached. And the movie ends.